Good morning, Sunday Sunday friends. Thank you for joining us on the Sunday Sunday podcast. Today on our podcast, we are honored to welcome Dennis, a veteran who has bravely served our country not just in one, but two wars. His journey is one of courage, one of resilience, and a deep sacrifice. Beyond the uniform, Dennis carries stories of strength, brotherhood, and lessons that will inspire us today and will continue to inspire. We're very grateful that Dennis is here with us today to share his experience and give us a glimpse into what it means to serve, to struggle, and to find purpose after war. So please join us in welcoming Dennis to the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Well, Dad, so thank you for sitting down with the tribe today. And we are calling this a Veteran Scoop, a Journey of Service. And we know that you've been through a lot, and we really do appreciate your time. So just not as a veteran, but as my father. So it's a great deal to have you here today. So you served in both Vietnam and Desert Storm, two very different wars, each with its own challenges and history. And you've experienced not only the battles themselves, but also the way the country treated veterans during that time. And that perspective is rare, and I'm honored to hear that perspective from you. So I want to better understand what those moments meant to you. Did you always want to serve in the military? Was that a dream of yours, or what led you to enlist?
Well, one of my favorite, pastimes in life was history, particularly military history. I enjoyed it. In a favorite cousin of mine, we reenacted battles as children. We'd make toy soldiers. We would do everything that we could with military history. So probably having an interest in that drove me toward the military on that. But I wouldn't say that I was going to join. I never thought about joining. That just wasn't part of my life, and it just ended up doing that over the years.
So you never imagined you, let alone even go to war, two of them. So what made you enlist then?
When I was 18, after high school, I really wasn't sure what I was going to do, and the Vietnam War was going on. And at that time, we had a lottery, or as we call it now, the draft. That entails a 365 ping pong balls. Picture a little cage like bingo, and they would twirl these balls, and they'd take them out one at a time. And my number at that was 151, which means I had a very good chance of being drafted. And when you're drafted, you don't have a choice of where you go or what you're going to do in the military. So I decided maybe I better do something about that. As a young man, or young boy, I should say, at the age of 6 or 7, my father took me on a helicopter ride. He paid for it. I remember that very vividly. And I said, one day I want to be a helicopter pilot. So I joined the military with the thought or the hope of becoming a helicopter pilot. The only caveat to that is that if I should fail that course to become a pilot, they could send me anywhere I wanted to. So that was an incentive to do very, very well. So my goal when I joined the military was to get out of the draft so I didn't have to do some of the things that other soldiers had to do and do something that I always dreamed that I could do. So that was the life choice that I took for getting into the military.
What was your initial thought? What did you think? And how did your family react to that?
When I was going to go to Vietnam, the thing that I remember the most is how will I act in a war? It was one of those driving forces. Would I act appropriately? Would I be brave? Would I run? I had all these thoughts about that. So that was my one concern about that. When I got to Vietnam, I'll show a little story there. We arrived at the airport. It was an international airport, Saigon. And then they would put you on a bus to transfer you to what they call the reception center, where they would give you uniforms and they'd give you shots and they would give you a little few classes on what to do things. When I got off that plane, they put us on a bus. And I'm carrying my little duffel bag on the bus, and I look at these windows, and they all have chicken wire all the way around the windows. And I thought, well, what is this for? And the driver informed us, says, well, this is so that they won't throw hand grenades in the bus as they're passing by. And I had to chuckle. I remember chuckling about that. Well, here we got a group of soldiers with no guns, no weapons on a bus with chicken wire on it. That may stop the hand grenades, but there's not going to stop many bullets. And that was the way, that first thought as I got to that unit. And that was my first impression of war in Vietnam.
How old were you?
At that time, I was 19. I turned 20 in Vietnam. So my birthday was on the same month that I arrived there.
Paula, you had a question.
Pardon?
I just wanted to
Oh, I'm
ask you a
sorry.
quick
Go
question,
ahead.
Dennis, and maybe I missed it, but when you were drafted or when your number came up, how long were you committed to stay in Vietnam, or what was your tour of duty supposed to be?
Well, at that time, it was very flexible. It was depending on how long they needed us there. It was going to be for a 4-year enlistment. That was going to be my requirement once I finished flight school. However, the Vietnam War closed down within 2 years after I was there, and let's make that 3 years. So the units that I was in closed down. So I spent probably less than 3 years there actually in the service when I returned home. But when I returned from Vietnam, the military realized that they had too many troops now, so they had what they call a RIF, a reduction in forces. So they put a lot of soldiers out, and I was one of those soldiers that my time had expired, so they let me return to civilian life.
And while you were at Vietnam, how did you stay connected to people at home? And
Well, we don't have like today where you have phones and you can do videos or anything like that. It was letters. We had to write a lot of letters. I think there was one occasion where they had some phones brought in and we had long lines to be able to talk, but that was only one time. Everything was by letters, sending both coming in and receiving. As we call, and you'll see those sometimes in the movies, mail call. That was a very, very important time for us. And it would happen usually only about once a week, sometimes only 2 weeks, because they had to get it to the Saigon area. Then they had to move it out to all the units, which were all over the country.
return home, is there an impactful event or actually, before we go there, I remember you telling me a story and I wanted you to share it if you don't mind. I believe there was something that you guys did to the officers, or you guys, there was a barbecue of some kind and you guys rained on their parade or something with their food. You did something to their food. Can you share that story? I thought it was quite funny.
Okay. A little bit about what I did in Vietnam. I was a helicopter pilot, flying UH-1s, what they called slicks. And I was a warrant officer. The officers decided to have a volleyball match with the next camp over. So we was all going to get together. We got there in their camp, and the place that we stayed is called the Plantation. The French had a very large influence in Vietnam. And this was kind of like a little villa with little walls all the way around, a big courtyard in the center. And so we got all over there and we was going to play volleyball. Big barbecue. We was ready to go. And about the time we were ready to eat, we saw all these, we call them smoke grenades, coming over into the compound. Now, what happened, the enlisted troops were pretty agitated because we were doing this, probably without them. So from all around the building, you saw these tear gas grenades coming in, and they landed all over the thing. Of course, the tear gas, we were all crying, but it ruined all the meat. After looking back on it, I thought it was very humorous, and I can understand why they did that, but we didn't get our volleyball game, and we didn't have barbecue, and I'm sure the enlisted were very happy about that event.
So those who don't understand, the officers are higher ranked than the enlisted. And so the lower rank were not happy, I'm sure, with the the accommodations with the officers. So, Dad, just real quick, your rank in when you enlisted, because you were a pilot. What was your rank when you enlisted?
Well, when you're enlisted, you're given the temporary rank of sergeant just for flight school. But when you graduate, it's warrant officer one. And at that time, they had warrant officers 1 through 4. And so when I went to Vietnam, I was they called it W1, warrant officer one, affectionately called wobbly ones, because we really didn't know much and we didn't know how to fly. So I was a wobbly one in Vietnam.
Paula?
Sorry, Dennis. So just another point of clarification. So you're 17, 18 years old at the time that you got drafted?
I was
Nine.
18 when I joined.
Okay.
Okay,
So
I
how
didn't get drafted.
Oh, I apologize. How old were you when you were flying?
I was 20 years old. Like I turned 20 years old in Vietnam the same month that I arrived. Part of the story I like to tell one time is in Vietnam, for the first 3, 4 months, you're a co-pilot. Then you become a pilot in charge because you have the experience and they change you over. Well, there was a time that I finally became a PIC, pilot in charge, and I was in charge of the crew. And I should say in the Huey crew, it was myself or the pilot, a co-pilot, a flight engineer whose job was to keep the helicopter going, and the gunner. And both the flight engineer and the gunner had machine guns on the side. That was also part of the job when we was flying. I remember we was going on one mission, and when I got back, I realized that I was a pilot in command, and that they called me the old man. I was 20 years old.
Oh my
My
gosh.
pilot was 19. My
Oh,
crew chief was 18, and my gunner was 17, and I was the old man flying a $500,000 aircraft in combat. So that's the irony of war. They let the young
Wow.
people fight the war. So that was a memory that I've always carried with me.
that's what I wanted to
Wow.
ask you. Like, how old were your colleagues? I
Mhm.
was wondering if you were, as a 20-year-old helicopter pilot in charge, if you were directing individuals like in their 30s or 40s, but it sounds like
Mhm.
that you were the old man. Thank
Yes,
goodness.
yes.
Savvy, you want to say something?
Well, I was just thinking to myself, first off, we got children running the country, like the running the military. How did you feel with such responsibility on your hands? Like that's a lot of responsibility at such a young age.
I don't think as a young age at that time that I thought about the responsibility. But we had a lot of training, and that's part of the military. You train to react without thinking on that. And that's the way I was trained. So when it came to the responsibility, I knew that what I had to do is what I was taught, and a part of that was getting my crew back safely. That was a responsibility I always thought about, getting the crew back safely. During the war, I was never shot down. And the crew chiefs and gunners always wanted to go with Mr. McBrayer. That's the title that they call us, the Misters, when the warrant officers. So they always wanted to fly with me because they considered me lucky, and they wanted to always come back. And I took that responsibility gratefully, I guess you may say, because they depended on me to do that. And fortunately, during this war, I was got back safely. No crew member ever got hurt on my aircraft. So I guess I didn't really think about the responsibility till after I had left Vietnam and how much it really was at that age.
Wow. Minu.
Well, it's an honor to interview you, Papa Dennis. I have a question for you. What one lesson that you learned as a co pilot that you did not learn in your classroom setup?
Well, I learned one, they don't teach everything you need to know to fly a helicopter. The I'll relate a story because it also goes about one of my first experiences. Well, two actually. When I became a pilot in command, they took me out with an instructor pilot who was instructor pilot's the ones that trained you to make sure that you know what you're doing. And he showed me things that helicopter I never realized could do. Similar things like in a helicopter, if the engine quits, we call it auto rotation, and you can land safely on the ground, even if it quits, as long as you got a big field to land in or an area to land in. And this one pilot was showing me how to do things backwards, sideways, things that I never did knew the helicopter can do. So that thing was very interesting on what I was doing. Now going back to that as a co-pilot, I realized I didn't know much. My first flight in Vietnam, we get to the unit, and the same instructor is supposed to take you out to make sure you really know how to fly. You're going to take my word for it. So we got into the helicopter. The crew chief and gunners took these big machine guns off, went on the side to sit down, smoking a cigarette and waiting for us to go around the pattern to see what we could do. And this is my co-pilot, my first flight in Vietnam. We did 2 or 3 times around the traffic pattern just to make sure I knew what I was doing. When I went back over there, landed, the crew chiefs put these big machine guns back on the aircraft, and we took off on the first mission. The first mission was flying to a hilltop, and there were special forces on the hilltop, and they had been in battle. And we landed up there, and my first mission was picking up a dead special forces soldier. Okay, they put him on the helicopter, and I recall turning around the seat and looking at him, and he was not much older than myself on this, and it dawned on me that this is serious. This is what war is about. The thoughts were there, but I remember thinking that I wasn't very upset about that. I was okay being where I was and doing what I was doing. But the thought did finally that as a young man, 20-year-olds, maybe I'm not so immortal after all. That's a thought with us young soldiers there. We're immortal. It's only going to happen to the other guy. So that first experience in that war in that helicopter taught me that I need to be aware that that could happen. And it, again, maybe going back to responsibility, I need to take care of my crew so it doesn't happen to them. There's my first experience in war.
Wow.
That's a
Wow.
lot to
Wow. Thank you
digest.
for sharing that, Dad.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Dennis, again, you're so young at this age. You're 20 years old. How does that impact you now to have turned around in the helicopter that you were manning and taking your responsibility so seriously to turn around and see, a colleague, a fellow soldier, his dead body and, realizing, oh my goodness, I'm a mortal human being. I've got this huge weight on my shoulders. How does that impact the way that you view life and mortality, from that point forward?
Well, that was a long process. Having been in a couple of wars, my process of thoughts on that has changed considerably. Again, there I was 20 years old. I was immortal. Nothing was going to happen to me, and most of us thought that. The pilots that we had in that unit, we had one that we actually called Pappy. I remember him, Pappy Watson. He was 31. He was the grandfather of the group. Okay, he was the grandfather. Most of us were early 20s to mid 20s. All the pilots, the crew chiefs and gunners were 18, 19, maybe 20 years old. So at that time, the young mind, I wasn't worried so much about getting out of the war. I was going to. That was a thought. So over the process of my life being in another war, my process changed. And we'll talk about that a little later. But it wasn't a process. At that time, it was just, I'm here, I'm doing okay, I'm alive. And after the war, dropping back a little bit, I was satisfied with the way I conducted myself in a wartime environment. The thought going there, how will I act? I was satisfied with that. And just a little bit about the political stage. I didn't have politics. Most of us didn't have politics at that time. We didn't know if the war was right or wrong. We were there as a soldier. We served. We signed up. We do our job. Politics out of that whole equation there. Nowadays, it's a political thing when you talk about the Vietnam War. It wasn't when the soldiers were there.
Thank you for bringing that up a little about the politics, because I was wondering what was it really like, in that time. We all know what home looked like during that time, but in the military you have to put certain things away, and everyone's lives in that time matter. It's like you guys come together. So I'm wondering what it was like during that time, because that was still a very segregated, very hard time back home. But I'm assuming back, where you guys were at, you guys had to band together like brothers, for real.
We did. I had to helicopter pilots and things that we did in the aviation compared to the ground troops that were on the ground with two different environments. And you're right, segregation. There was segregation in the Vietnam War. And I did a lot of studying back in school when I went there about that. We didn't have much segregation in the aviation community. We were pretty close. But we didn't know much about politics. We didn't have television there. Okay? We just didn't have that. We had Armed Forces Network, and mostly that was there to entertain the troops. And they'll give us some news that was always censored, if you will, by the government. So we didn't know much about what was going on, and we called it the world. Okay. Back home, we call it the world. That's what it was. So we didn't know much about that, but we did know what were going on. We had different groups of people. I thought one was rather interesting. A little example. When at night, sometimes we'd go on top of bunkers. Bunkers are those large concrete areas that we go into when we're getting shelled or bombed. And we had two of them. We had one bunker off to the right and one off to the left. And when we wanted to go out there and relieve ourselves from the anxiety of war, we would go to one of these two bunkers at night, and then we would watch the bullets going across the sky. It would happen, the tracers. We'd see them, and we'd sit there and watch. We called the one the beer case, and the other one the marijuana patch. On the one, you would get there and drink beer, and the other one, you would go over and smoke marijuana. Drugs was prevalent there, and people looked away from that. But I always thought that was I was a beer patch guy. That's where I went. But it was even those little things like that. You had a different mentality, the segregation, if you will. And I come to find out, and again, I can't speak for those soldiers on the ground. They had an entirely different environment, but I'm sure they had their own. I once talked to a soldier from Vietnam on there, and I wasn't Vietnam. It was actually after Desert Storm, and he was in Iraq. And I told him, I says, you guys go down these roads. You have these IEDs. You don't know what's going to happen. He says, I admire you and I respect you for what you're doing. And he knew as a Vietnam vet, he says, Well, I can't picture you sitting in a helicopter with bullets flying up through you at all. I admire you. It was two different wars, but we all had two different versions of it. And war is always different on that one. So I bring that up because there is a difference that we'll probably talk about in the second war on that. It was in the military in the States. We didn't really care what the states were saying because we couldn't get the news anyway.
Thank you, Paula. That's a really great topic to bring up, Savi. So thank you for bringing that up. So just to transition out of Vietnam, I just want to ask you a quick question because we did talk about politics a little bit. How were you treated when you came home?
Well, I saw that question and it made me think back quite a bit on that. When we came home, we came back on a commercial flight out of Saigon and we landed in San Francisco. And there was 3 of us going back to Arizona where my home was at that time. And we wore uniforms. Now, we had heard that people spitting on you and doing this sort of things and calling you baby killers, that was something that happened, not to me personally. And that didn't happen to us in the airport, but we did notice that was walking in the airport, people would move aside and avoided us. Okay. They would move aside. There was no smiles. There was nothing. They would give us room so we could walk back. And I remember that. And I'll go a little bit about getting home because this is something I talked about on another VA interview that I did. We got home, well, let me say, when I got home, I was ready to unwind. I wanted to relax. I was back in the world, as we said. I wanted to spend time with the family. Well, not so much as that as I needed a little alone time. I mean, I just spent, my combat tour with somebody every single day. Even our rooms I shared with 3 other people. There was never, ever any alone time. And that's what I wanted. But the world at that time for me decided, okay, you're back home. You did your part. Glad you're here. Go get a job, get busy and don't worry about the war anymore. And I tell people that's easier said than done. I mean, you spend a year seeing these things that we see on that. Now we're expected to be normal and go do what the person that hasn't been in war done. So that was a difficult adjustment. And I know I could speak for some friends. They had that same difficult, we call it the transition period on it. So I wouldn't say it was people treated me badly, but they really didn't want to hear about the war. Nobody asked me about the war. Okay. I hear a lot of things. Well, they don't want to talk. Well, I'm here to say a lot of family members and friends don't want to talk about the war. They don't want to hear about it. So nobody, literally, not one single person asked me what went on there. No idea what I went through, and I'm sure other veterans have had the same situation. So that kind of sums up how I was treated after Vietnam.
Are you surprised that people are so interested in hearing your story now? Because I know that you've been interviewed multiple times and people didn't want to talk about it in the 70s. And now people, you hear soldiers, thank you for your service, and people buy your meals and they're honored. You've gotten so many rewards now that people know that that you are a veteran and that you have served. It's so different now. How do you feel? How does it make you feel considering how you were treated back then?
I had a healing experience that not many veterans, I think, had from the Vietnam War. After Desert Storm, we came back, of course, on a commercial flight into New York City. And when we come off the flight, apparently the crowd knew that we landed because obviously it was announced. And when we walked off the plane, passengers that were waiting for other flights were lined up on both sides of the exit ramp with signs saying, "Welcome home." And they cheered and they clapped. And I was so surprised. I didn't expect that. And out of that plane, I think we had 250 soldiers. There's 3 of us from Vietnam. And our captain says, our major, actually, our commander says, Vietnam veterans get off first. And he let us go first at the homecoming. So for me, that was a healing process. I was fortunate that I was able to have that because not very few veterans have that opportunity to do that. So that was the beginning. That was actually the beginning of my healing process after 20 years of Vietnam. So it took a little while to get to that point.
Wow. That probably would have brought me to tears. Savvy.
Mr. Dennis, thank you so much for going down and memory lane with us. I guess not my question, but my thought process is the mental health for our soldiers. Just listening to you talk about that kind of caused my anxiety to go up a little bit. You've mentioned some real difficult things that you can't unsee. Like that's just things you just can't unsee or even unfeel. Now that you are, older and have gone through life, our mental health through that process, or how we treat our vets hasn't been so good. And you're fortunate to be healthy and just engaged and not like some of our vets today. How do you feel your mental health is, as well as how do you feel for the mental health then and today? I know it's changed. It's coming up to not be such a taboo subject anymore. You said you came home and nobody asked you how you felt.
Well, that's a very good question. I've had the opportunity to talk to I've had the opportunity over the years to talk to Iraq and Afghanistan veterans. When they know I'm a veteran from Vietnam, we have a mutual respect, and they talk to me, okay? And I ask them what they're doing. It's pretty easy for vets to talk to vets. And I'm going to bring something up. I've talked to Shannon, my daughter here, about this. I'm going to show you a hat, okay? All right. It says Vietnam Desert Storm veteran. And I didn't wear it often. I was talking to a Vietnam vet that had a hat on once. And I don't know how the subject got there, but he told me, he says, I wear the hat because I want to be able to show another Vietnam that I've been there in case he wants to talk. Now, I remember that from years ago. I just spent 4 days in Las Vegas, and I was going to wear this hat from the time I got on the plane till I got home. And I'm going to tell you, that was a healing process for me. During that time, I had literally dozens of people saying, thank you for your service. But even more important to that, I had 7 people come up and talk to me about the war. And these were veterans, okay? Except for one case, which I thought was special. But I had one veteran come up to me, and he was like a little boy, same age as me. He was a helicopter pilot, and he talked for 15 minutes. I think I said hello and goodbye to him, but he talked, and he was happy, and he just expressed himself. And I knew it was because of the hat. And I had a young man come up there, and he shook my hand, and he says, my dad's a veteran. I get a little choked up on this. He says, my dad's a Vietnam vet, and I don't know what to do because he's having some problems. And we talked. Not me telling him what to do, but sharing my experiences, so maybe that would help. And he cried, okay, and gave me a hug and walked on. So this hat now, I wear it. I will probably wear it when I get a chance on just going out on vacations, just for that reason. And for me, it's giving a chance to give back to the veterans. I went and stayed at the USO at the airport in Las Vegas, and I have a picture of that. I got a picture with 4 veterans there, Desert Storm, 2 Vietnams, and another person that was in the Vietnam era. And we just had a reunion. We didn't know each other. We talked like we had known each other all our lives as brothers. And that's what the veterans do when they talk to each other. And if I have to say anything, I encourage other veterans to talk to veterans. They have groups, but sometimes even then they don't unless they get me in the room. Then I start sharing my experiences, and then they do that. But kind of forgot where the question was going but I did want to share that one experience. It was a very pleasant one. It was also another part of the healing process, which is still ongoing for me. And it was a very positive one.
Dennis, I just have to say, God bless you, because that just speaks to how you are now. You're so wise, but mostly without even knowing it and without even necessarily going out into the world and trying to speak to veterans. You are an instrument of healing to these veterans that don't even know that they may need that healing. And again, it just goes back to not being asked, like, how was Vietnam? What was your experience? Because maybe even if somebody asked you at that time, maybe you wouldn't have even known what to say, but it would have been good for someone to ask. But we go through these moments in our lives at all stages where we want to talk about something, but we don't know how to bring it up, or we know somebody that we want to ask something, but we don't know how to ask. So I just have to say, God bless you for being that instrument now to people of your age or younger, or people that maybe are just now enlisting, on how to handle feelings and emotions and process and feelings of loss, all the way to pride of your service. So God bless you.
Along that same thought, Dennis, I know you said, you flew helicopters, but maybe you can't navigate a computer. But I want to put something in your, just a thought in your head. I think you should start a podcast.
I think that's a
What
great
you
idea.
what
I
you
love
just
that.
said about wearing that hat and how people were coming to you and wanting to speak with you. There's hundreds of men and women too. We forget that some women did serve in Vietnam
Yes, they did.
that want to hear these stories, that want to have a place of community, that want to have a chance to process the things that perhaps you're processing as we're having this short conversation. I think, and as Carolina said, there's an opportunity for service and for connection here that a wise veteran who has served in two very different wars could offer a space for individuals to come together and connect and reminisce and heal. So I want to put that out there for you. You should start a podcast.
Yeah, only if I had this crew running it.
We can help you get started.
We can help you.
Yeah, Paula is definitely the leader of this.
Yeah, she's doing well. She's doing good. I like it.
So I just want to say that my dad started off with Hueys, correct?
Yeah, that's
And
correct.
then transitioned into Chinooks.
Right.
So you flew Chinooks towards the end of your career. So I want to jump into Desert Storm and how Vietnam had prepared you for Desert Storm and how different Desert Storm was from Vietnam. And when did you find out you were going to Desert Storm?
The biggest difference in between those two wars, at 20, I was immortal. At 40, I knew I was mortal. Common sense and wisdom took over. And I knew the vulnerability that I would be in and the responsibility. I was now more responsible for what I needed to do and who I needed to take care of on that. An example was in our unit, I think I said we had 3 Vietnam veterans and only 2 of us were pilots. The other one was actually in Vietnam as a soldier, and he had some stories that we related to, and all 3 of us would talk together. But in Desert Storm, I flew Chinooks, the large one. I think there's a picture in the back here. My daughter sat up there. And we would fly in groups of 4, and we do missions in Desert Storm. We were moving mostly troops and supplies forward on it to keep the soldiers fed and watered and everything else they needed to do the war. We always flew in groups of 4, and it was at one big meeting once, and I think we had 16 Chinooks in groups of 4, and we had our mission and we had a briefing. And 3 of the young pilots had any questions, they raised their hands. He says, there was 2 other pilots in there and myself. And then we said, we want these 3 Vietnam vets last. And the commander says, why? He says, we know that if we go down, they're going to come down and pick us up. Okay. They had that faith in us. And I realized at that time, I did have a responsibility to these young pilots. They're still in their 20s, maybe 30s. I had my 40th birthday at Desert Storm on the day the war ended on it. So I was 20 years apart. I had birthdays in 2 different wars. But that was a feeling of great responsibility for me that I didn't feel in the first war. I knew now that I had to take care of this. And it wasn't just my crew. It was those other people's in my flight and the other people in the company. So that was the biggest change as far as responsibility went.
Is there any significant event that you want to share that happened at Desert Storm?
Well, I'm gonna share. I will give you a couple of events on there. I'm gonna go back to Vietnam once because not everything was downbeat or horrific or bad. I remember one incident that I was flying with my Huey, the small helicopter, and we had our 4 crew members. And I was coming back from a mission, going back to our base. We call it our home base. And I decided I'm going to go a little low, real fast. And we're talking 120 miles an hour on it. And of course, Vietnam is rice paddies. These rice paddies have little 2-foot dikes, maybe 3-foot dikes surrounding them to keep the water in. And then the rice sits up about 6 inches above the water. So I was going to have fun. I'm going to see how low I could get. So it would go real fast. And as we get just to the dike, we have a little collective, which makes us go up and down. I pull it, pop us over, go back down, and go across the rice paddy again. And we did this for 30 minutes. And I loved it. It was fun. And then I got out good. We landed there, and the crew chief got out, and that was his helicopter. And he reached into the window as I was getting the helicopter shut off, and he slapped me real hard on the side of my helmet. And I looked at him surprised. And he says, this is a quote, "Sir, get your ass out of my helicopter." I said, "Okay." And I walked out. He says, "Look at this." Now, the helicopter, on the bottom of the little helicopter, they got what they call shoe skids. It's little pieces of metal all down the skids there to protect the skids from getting damaged. And there's a gap between that skids and the skids and this little metal part. And the entire metal part was covered with rice on it. Because I'd gone so low, I'd hit those patties and rice. And he got me a brush and a rag, and he says, "You're going to clean every piece of that rice off of there." So the next hour, I'm helping him do that. He was a good crew chief, one of the best ones, but I had to clean that out. So we had a laugh over that. It's those little things sometimes that we do in war that you remember that takes your mind off the other ones. Okay. You talked about Desert Storm. I remember 2 incidents in there. One of them is we were flying in after the war. We'd completed it, but the Iraqis had burned the oil wells. I think there was over 600 of them that were on fire. So the whole horizon was covered in smoke, and you'd see the oil wells, actually flames coming through the smoke occasionally. We got a mission to go in there and supply some troops, and we saw the wall of smoke. When we went in, everything turned to the term was used ochre, but it's kind of a burnt orange. Everything was burnt orange. There's no color other than that. And when you entered it, you could taste the sweetness on your oil coming through the windows on it. And you couldn't really see the flakes on it, but you could taste the sweetness. You could see everything is brown. We thought that was very strange. When we landed, we had to land there. And as we was landing, we saw all these big flashes going off. We thought maybe they were explosions. What they were is the troops on the ground were taking pictures of us coming in there. And these were little flash bulbs that when they went off, they reflected off of so much, it looked like explosions in there on that. And I can only imagine what our Chinook was coming in there, what it was doing, because when the blades turned, they put off a friction. So it lit up the sky, apparently. When we came in, it looked like a UFO, if you will. And I thought that was very, very interesting. Another little thing, while we were flying there in the middle of the desert from the ocean, 50, 100 miles, we saw a boat on a trailer sitting in the middle of the desert. Apparently, they tried to take one back to Iraq and had to abandon it. It was rather interesting. If you don't mind, I'll show one thing. It was kind of in a moment that I thought maybe this is what my life has to be or what is in store. In Kuwait, airport was damaged. The buildings a lot of them were destroyed, and I had a special mission to go move things around Iraq on the battlefield with my Chinook. And we had our crew, and we in the airport, we had bunks or cots in our sleeping bags and little offices that had been abandoned. Nobody was there. The tower was shot up. In front of us, by our Chinook, we had an airliner where the front part was still intact and the tail, but the rest was burned out because they had bombed it. There was craters all over the airfield. And one morning I decided to just take a run down there. And I remember running down the runway. Nobody was there. I had the entire Kuwait International Airport runway for my running place. And along the runway were big craters where they had dropped bombs on it. And you could see the horizon with the oil and the burning things. And I remember stopping and saying, okay, I survived 2 wars. Why did that happen? And that's when it kind of dawned on me after a life trying to these 2 wars between each other that my purpose in life is probably not for myself anymore. I'm a believer in God. I believe in God. And I remember saying, okay, I'm not here for Dennis anymore. I've done my part. You got me through 2 wars. Let me know what's going to go happen next. And it was one of those moments in my life that was very powerful. Very powerful. And that's what war did. It wasn't it was nothing miraculous, nothing earth changing. It was a simple place with me and God sitting on a runway in Iraq with all these bomb craters on it. I always had to share that because sometimes I know veterans that they've had these moments too. And surprisingly, they pop when you least expect them. And they're very powerful. I had to share that little moment with you.
Wow, thanks.
Mm.
I've never heard that story.
You was going to ask me a story you never heard. That was one.
I do want to touch on your awards. Well, let Savvy ask her question real quick, and then we can talk about some of your awards and recognitions. I know there's really a great story that I would love for people to hear. So go ahead, Savvy.
Actually, I just wanted to make a comment. Dennis, thank you for sharing what an existential moment for yourself in the middle of a desert, no less. Like, can you imagine just being met by the creator in that moment and be like, hey, like you kind of had a Moses moment, like in the desert, burning
Hmm.
bush, like what am I doing here? What am I going to be doing now? Like you saw me through some serious toughness, and what a resilient moment. Life is hard and war is hard. That word is scary for some of us. And you got through it, and now you just took a moment to say, I'm here now. What would you have me do now? What an existential
Hmm.
moment. And thank you for sharing that with
Mm.
us.
You're welcome.
Very beautiful. Service and gratitude.
Mm.
Beautiful.
Absolutely. I need to ask this, and I know we're kind of running into our time here, but was the fact that you had children, you didn't have children in Vietnam, but you did have children in Desert Storm, did that change your view on anything at all? Thinking, okay, not only am I responsible for soldiers, but I also have children. Desert Storm, you don't have to touch on that too long if you don't want to, but how did it?
Real quick, I'm reading a book about John McCain and his life on that. I'm just finishing up now, and there's something he said in there that related to something once said to me. Somebody very close to me a long time ago, I was talking to him and says, I haven't been around family, my children much, and I'm sorry for that. And she says, don't be sorry, because you chose a profession that you have been wanting to do all your life, and you're doing something for your country. And sometimes you just have to make that first, and we will adjust. Okay. That was wise words. And I saw that in John McCain's. So I changed my thought of that. Yes, I would like to have been there to be a better father, to be present, but that wasn't the career that I chose. And it wasn't the reason I was put on this solely on this earth for. I had another purpose. And I think after my career, I kind of figured out what that purpose is too. Family's important. Okay. And I wasn't always there. And sometimes because of my service, it's been difficult. I had some things happen that I wish that hadn't happened. I regrets, but that was because of my military service. And I can't change that part, and I don't want to. I hope that answers that.
So I just want to ask you about your awards and recognitions. If you want to share your awards, I know there's one behind you. I know you have a lot, but let's just touch on that real briefly before we close out.
Okay. Well, the awards, it was real important in my early career, but after that, it wasn't so important. They give me awards, and I said, that's fine. But there is one award that I'll share with it. I got an Army Achievement, Air Force Achievement Award while I was in the Army. And that's probably the most important one I have. And along with that I got a reward from the American Legion Aviators Branch out of New York City for the same action. I was stationed in Fort Carson with Chinooks, and I got a call that a young cadet had fallen off the side of the mountain on Air Force Academy. And I had to launch up here to do a search and rescue mission. And that's what we did here in Colorado in the high altitudes, because we could do that. And the winds were bad. It was bad. And we went over there, and he was on a side of a cliff about 100 feet down. And the Chinook, we had to hover against the wall to be able to get a hoist or a hook. You've probably seen them sometimes on TV. They put a basket. We tried to bring them up. And so we got close enough there, and we pulled him up, and we had a doctor on board who started working on him, trying to make sure he was okay. Well, within a few minutes, the doctor says, we have to get him to the hospital. He's not going to make it. So we drove to the hospital. We flew to the hospital in Colorado Springs. Now, I wasn't familiar with the hospital there, and it was getting dark, and I couldn't find it. So the hospital staff had found that out. So they lined the pad around there with ambulances, and they turned on all the lights. So we landed on the pad with these ambulances. And when I landed there, I found out later that I had busted out several windows on the houses because the Chinook is very powerful, and I came in so fast that we busted windows in houses, which my commanding general said, well done, we'll pay for it, don't worry about it. But anyway, they rushed him off. They ran on board because they were going to lose him. And I got home, and I got a call 2 days later, and it was from this cadet's father. And the cadet wasn't no more than 21, maybe 20 years old. And his father called up, and he says, I want to thank you. He says, you saved my son's life. Now, I say me, it was a crew that we had to save the life. It wasn't I was just the pilot in command. And of course, that made me feel good that he made it. But the important one that happened is he called me next year, the same father. And he says, this is Mr. McClellan. He says, you remember my son? I says, yes. He says, I'm calling you to thank you because today is his birthday and he's still alive. Okay. That is the biggest war that I've ever had in the military. It's the most special. It's the only one I have in my house here that I show proudly on it because of the Air Force on that. And I went to New York City because the American Legion just gives a award to the Army, Navy, and Marines and Coast Guard for, they call it Valors in Aviation. And I was fortunate to go there with my wife and receive the award in New York City. And that was a special one. They gave me a ribbon to put on my chest there. It's completely non-regulation. You're not supposed to wear it, but I wore it proudly everywhere I went. And nobody could figure out what it was because it's not on any charts. That's in my military career. That's one of my greatest achievements, be able to give that father back his son. So
I absolutely love that story. I've heard that story a couple of times. I've also heard like how close the blades were to the cliff, and how your co-pilot was literally telling you the space that you had, how close you were, and it was a very risky mission.
And
you guys really worked as a team.
exactly. Yes.
And that's something that I've always felt, the camaraderie in the military, and with being a military brat and being on the base. There's just a sense of camaraderie, sense of the team. And so I can't imagine how your crew team worked together to get that young man. So I don't know if you want to share a little bit about how that rescue actually went. But we have just a few more minutes before we can close out. Do you want to share that?
No, I think you shared most of it. It was a crew effort. It's a crew that did it too. I just happened to be the one that controls, but without them, we couldn't have done it. So I think you summed it up very well.
Well, Dad, thank you. Thank you for joining the tribe today on this Sunday morning. I really appreciate you.
Oh, my pleasure. I'm glad you invited me.
I love you very much, and I have so much
You
respect
too.
for your journey. And
I
felt very honored to enlist in the military, and it was because of your service. And so I want to thank you for your service, and to all of those who have served before, now, and who will be serving in the future. So we are going to be launching this podcast on Veterans Day or the day before Veterans Day. I just want to honor everybody who has served. And with that, if anybody else on the podcast has anything else to say, anything else to add, I just want to send out love and gratitude to everybody.
As I tell people when they tell me that, it was my honor to serve. And I would like to close just with one thing. If somebody listening to this knows a veteran, particularly if they've been in a war, ask them if they want to talk about it. Better yet, say you would like to hear. They may not say anything, but the answer is going to be no if you don't ask. So you may make a difference.
Thank you. I think that's a good way to close out.
Yes. So it's been a privilege to have you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Podcast. To our listeners, thank you for joining us today and being part of our conversations. We'll see you next week.
Happy Sunday, Sunday.
Happy Sunday, Sunday to everyone.